The rebellion's encrypted distress signal had been broadcasting for 3 hours before anyone understood what they were hearing. It wasn't a ship in trouble. It wasn't an Imperial ambush. The automated listening post on Lothal's northern plateau had picked up something falling through the atmosphere, something that wasn't registering on any known scanner frequency. By the time the Imperial garrison dispatched a patrol, the impact crater was already cooling. The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy that flows through star systems like breath through lungs. Jedi speak of it as the source of their power. Sith claim it as their birthright. But neither order had words for what arrived that day on Lothal's dusty plains. No hyperspace signature preceded it. No ship debris scattered across the landing site. Just a circular shield, red and white and blue, half buried in scorched earth, and a man in strange armor pulling himself from the crater with the kind of determination that suggested falling from the sky was merely an inconvenience. Steve Rogers coughed dust from his lungs and tried to remember where he was supposed to be. The HYDRA facility in Slovenia. The quantum tunnel. Pierce's desperate gambit to open a doorway to somewhere. Steve had thrown his shield into the mechanism to stop it, and then the world had turned inside out. Colors that shouldn't exist. Sounds that predated language. The sensation of being pulled apart and stitched back together by forces that didn't care about human physiology. And then impact. He stood slowly, every muscle protesting but functional. The super soldier serum had kept him alive through the dimensional crossing, but it hadn't made the experience pleasant. His tactical suit was scorched in places, the fabric smoking slightly. His shield lay 10 feet away, the star at its center reflecting 2 suns climbing over an unfamiliar horizon. 2 suns. Steve Rogers had fought in World War II, been frozen for 70 years, battled aliens over New York, and faced down a genocidal AI trying to drop a city from the sky. He'd seen enough impossible things to recognize when the universe had fundamentally changed the rules. This wasn't Earth. The landscape stretched in every direction like something from a western, arid plains broken by rock formations that jutted toward a sky too pale to be home. In the distance, a settlement sprawled across the horizon, angular buildings that looked more industrial than residential. Smoke rose from a dozen locations. The architecture was all wrong. The air smelled wrong. Even gravity felt slightly different, lighter somehow, like his body weighed 5 pounds less than it should. He retrieved his shield, feeling its familiar weight settle onto his arm. Vibranium. Indestructible. The one constant in a universe that had just stopped making sense. A sound cut through the morning air, a high-pitched whine that Steve's instincts immediately categorized as trouble. He turned toward the settlement and saw them coming, 6 figures on vehicles that hovered above the ground, moving fast across the plains. They wore white armor that gleamed in the double sunlight, carrying weapons he didn't recognize but understood perfectly well. Soldiers. Authority. And from the way they were moving, they weren't coming to offer assistance. Steve ran toward an outcropping of rocks, his enhanced speed carrying him across the terrain faster than any normal human could manage. He needed cover. He needed information. He needed to understand what he was dealing with before. The first energy bolt hit the ground 3 feet to his left. Not bullets. Energy weapons. Bright red bolts that superheated the dirt on impact, leaving glass-smooth craters. Steve's tactical mind cataloged the information instantly: ranged weapons, relatively slow projectile speed compared to bullets, high temperature yield. Dangerous, but dodgeable. He dove behind the rocks as a dozen more bolts chewed into the stone. The soldiers, stormtroopers, though Steve had no way of knowing their designation, spread out with practiced efficiency. Military discipline. Coordinated fire patterns. Whatever organization they represented, it trained its people well. Unidentified individual, a voice called out, mechanically amplified. You are in violation of Imperial Decree 374. Surrender immediately or be terminated. Imperial. That word carried weight across every language, across every world. Steve had fought empires before. "I don't want trouble," Steve called back, keeping his shield up as energy bolts continued to pepper his position. "I'm not armed and I'm not a threat. I just need to know where I am." The response was another volley of blaster fire. Some things, Steve reflected, were universal. Tyranny didn't waste time on conversation. He waited for the pause between volleys, then moved. The super soldier serum pushed his body to its limits as he cleared the rock formation in a sprint, shield raised. 3 bolts ricocheted off Vibranium with sounds like hammers striking bells. Steve didn't slow. He closed the distance to the nearest trooper in 4 seconds, ducked under a wild shot, and slammed his shield into the soldier's chest. The trooper went down hard, armor cracking on impact. Steve spun, shield singing through the air. It struck the second trooper's weapon, shattering it into sparking components, then ricocheted to the third, hitting with enough force to knock the soldier unconscious. The shield returned to Steve's hand like an old friend coming home. The remaining 3 troopers opened fire simultaneously. Steve moved through the blaster bolts like he was dancing, shield deflecting, body twisting. 70 years of ice hadn't dulled his reflexes. Neither had crossing dimensional barriers. He was Captain America, and these soldiers, whoever they were about to learn what that meant. 2 more troopers went down before their commander could call for backup. The last one standing dropped his weapon and raised his hands. Steve approached carefully, shield ready. Up close, the armor looked even stranger, manufactured, impersonal, designed to strip away individuality. The helmet's blank expression stared at him like a skull. "I'll ask again," Steve said quietly. "Where am I?" "Lothal," the trooper said, voice shaking through the helmet speakers. "Outer Rim territory under Imperial jurisdiction. You're in a lot of trouble, whoever you are." "Lothal." Steve filed the name away. "And the Empire?" "The Galactic Empire." "You really don't know?" The trooper laughed nervously. "What are you, a smuggler from the unknown regions?" "Doesn't matter. You just assaulted Imperial personnel. There's no walking away from that." Steve heard the whine of more approaching speeders. Reinforcements. He'd bought himself maybe 2 minutes. "Tell your Empire I'm not their enemy," Steve said, stepping back. "But I won't surrender to people who shoot first and ask questions never." He ran toward the settlement, shield on his back, leaving 6 unconscious troopers and a mystery that would reach Imperial headquarters within the hour. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the sound of starship engines, a sound he didn't recognize but instinctively understood as pursuit. Captain America had arrived in a galaxy at war. And the Empire had just learned that not every battle could be won with overwhelming force. In the capital city of Lothal, inside a command center bristling with technology beyond Steve's comprehension, a junior officer reviewed the helmet cam footage from the skirmish. He watched the man in the strange armor move, impossibly fast, impossibly skilled, wielding a shield like it was an extension of his body. The officer reached for his comlink with shaking hands. This was above his clearance level. Far above. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The settlement was called Capital City, though Steve suspected that was more aspiration than accuracy. The buildings rose in geometric patterns that suggested function over beauty, industrial structures, landing platforms for ships he couldn't name, and everywhere the presence of white armored soldiers patrolling streets where civilians kept their heads down and their pace quick. Steve had seen occupied territory before. Paris under Nazi control. Villages across Europe where fear was enforced at gunpoint. This was the same song in a different key, the oppressive silence of people who'd learned that drawing attention meant disappearing. He kept to the shadows, moving through back alleys where the architecture provided cover. His tactical suit drew stares from the few people he passed, farmers carrying crates of produce, laborers covered in machine grease, a child clutching her mother's hand who pointed at his shield before being pulled away. Their clothing was simple, practical, worn from use. Working-class people ground down by something larger than themselves. Steve's comm unit was dead, no signal in a universe that didn't have Earth satellites. His equipment was limited to what he carried, his shield, his suit, and training that had carried him through impossible situations. He'd survived worse. He'd figure this out. The sound of repulsor engines made him press against a wall as 3 speeder bikes passed overhead, stormtroopers scanning the streets below with mounted searchlights. They were looking for him. Efficiently, methodically, the way an occupying force controlled territory it didn't trust. "You're the one from the plains," a voice said behind him. Steve spun, shield coming up instinctively. A woman stood in the mouth of an alley, green skin, white facial markings, wearing a practical flight jacket over clothes that had seen better days. Her hand rested near a holstered weapon, but she hadn't drawn it. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, measuring him the way soldiers measured potential threats. Or potential allies. "You're looking at me like you've never seen a Twi'lek before," she said, like a twitching with what might have been amusement. "Where are you from, stranger?" "Somewhere else," Steve said carefully. "Far from here. That much is obvious. You took down 6 stormtroopers with a shield." She stepped closer, movements deliberate and non-threatening. "The Empire's going to turn this city inside out looking for you. Whatever you did to get their attention, congratulations, you're now the most wanted person on Lothal." Steve lowered his shield slightly. "I didn't want trouble. They fired first. They always do." The woman glanced over her shoulder toward the main street. "Listen, I don't know what your story is and I don't particularly care. But my people have a vested interest in keeping the Empire distracted, and you're currently doing an excellent job of that. So here's the deal, you come with me right now, or you try your luck out there with patrols closing in from 6 directions. Your choice, soldier. And yes, I can tell that's what you are." Steve studied her face. Combat veteran. Someone who'd seen the worst and kept fighting. He recognized the type because he'd served alongside hundreds just like her. "Your people," Steve said. "Who are they? Does the word rebellion mean anything to you?" It meant everything. Steve had been part of the Howling Commandos, the strategic resistance against Hydra and the Nazi war machine. He understood rebellion intimately, the desperate choices, the impossible odds, the refusal to bow to tyranny no matter the cost. But he also knew that rebellion didn't automatically mean righteous. History was full of insurgencies that replaced one nightmare with another. "It means questions," Steve said. "It means I need to understand what I'm being asked to join before I commit." The Twi'lek smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Smart. I like that. Most people hear rebellion and either run or start shooting." She extended her hand in a gesture that translated across species. "Numa. I run supplies for the local cell. And you are?" "Steve Rogers." He shook her hand, feeling calloused skin and a grip strengthened by hard labor. "Captain, formerly. Formerly military." Numa's eyebrows rose. "Let me guess, your government fell, your unit scattered, and you ended up on the wrong side of the Empire's attention." Close enough to the truth that Steve didn't correct her. "The transport leaves in 10 minutes, Numa continued, releasing his hand. "It's heading to a safe house outside the city. You'll meet people who can actually answer your questions, and maybe you'll answer a few of ours. Like how you moved fast enough to dodge blaster fire, or what that shield is made of, or why the Empire already has your biometrics flagged in their security network." That last part made Steve's tactical instincts flare. "How do you know that?" "Because I have friends in Imperial communications who aren't as loyal as they pretend." Numa gestured toward a side street. "Coming? Or should I leave you to explain your life story to the next patrol?" Steve heard the distant whine of more speeders converging on his position. Military pursuit patterns, tightening the net. They'd find him in minutes. He followed Numa. They moved through the city's underlevels, passages that Steve guessed were maintenance tunnels or forgotten infrastructure from before the Empire's occupation. Numa navigated them with practiced ease, occasionally checking a handheld device that blinked with symbols Steve couldn't read. Other people passed them in the tunnels, workers, smugglers, people whose faces carried the same worn determination he'd seen in resistance fighters across Europe. "How long has the Empire controlled Lothal?" Steve asked as they descended another level. 15 years, give or take, Numa said without slowing. Before that, it was just another outer rim world trying to get by. Then the Empire decided we had resources worth exploiting, minerals, agriculture, cheap labor. They built factories, installed a garrison, and made it clear that cooperation wasn't optional. Some people accepted it. Some people didn't. And you're one of the ones who didn't. I'm one of the ones who remembers what freedom felt like. Numa stopped at a junction, listening for pursuit. Silence. She continued forward. The Empire calls it order. Stability. Protection from chaos. But order enforced at gunpoint isn't peace, Captain Rogers. It's just slow-motion war where only one side is allowed to fight back. Steve had heard those arguments before, dressed in different words. The justifications of every fascist regime that promised security in exchange for surrender. Hydra had offered the same deal, wrapped in the language of inevitable progress and necessary sacrifice. The rebellion, Steve said. What are they fighting for? Honestly? Depends who you ask. Numa's leku twitched with something that might have been frustration. Some want the Republic back. Some want complete independence. Some just want to hurt the Empire because the Empire hurt them first. We're not a unified movement with a clear ideology, Captain. We're a collection of angry, desperate people who refuse to accept that the Empire won. The honesty was refreshing. Steve respected people who didn't pretend war was clean. And you? He asked. What are you fighting for? Numa was quiet for a moment, leading him through another turn in the tunnels. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of experience. I'm fighting so that the next generation doesn't grow up thinking this is normal. So kids don't learn to flinch when stormtroopers walk by. So people can speak their minds without disappearing into Imperial detention centers. She glanced back at him. Simple reasons. The kind worth dying for. Steve understood that. Those were the reasons he'd volunteered for Project Rebirth, the reasons he'd gone into the ice, the reasons he'd kept fighting even when the world moved on without him. They emerged into a warehouse district where massive cargo containers were stacked like building blocks. Numa led him to a battered transport ship that looked like it had survived multiple firefights, scorch marks along the hull, mismatched repair panels, engines that hummed with the distinctive sound of machinery held together by skill and prayer. A Lazette stood at the loading ramp, massive and muscular, carrying a weapon that looked like it fired kinetic projectiles instead of energy bolts. He watched Steve approach with the kind of wariness that suggested trust was earned slowly in his world. This is the one, the Lazette growled. 6 stormtroopers, Zeb, Numa confirmed. Non-lethal takedowns, shield combat, enhanced reflexes. He's either exactly what we need or a trap so obvious we'd be idiots to fall for it. Could be both, Zeb said, not taking his eyes off Steve. Steve stepped forward, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. I'm not a trap. I'm not your enemy. I'm just trying to understand where I am and how I get home. Home, Zeb repeated, like the word was foreign. Where's that? Earth, Steve said. Sol system. Milky Way galaxy. Both of them stared at him. Never heard of it, Numa said finally. Zeb. The Lazette shook his head. Not in any star chart I know. And I know a lot of star charts. Steve felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd suspected it the moment he saw two suns, but hearing confirmation made it real. He wasn't just lost. He was impossibly, incomprehensibly lost, in a galaxy that had never heard of Earth, fighting a war against an empire that shouldn't exist. "Get on board," Numa said, her voice gentler now. "Wherever you're from, Captain Rogers, you're not getting back there anytime soon. Might as well learn about where you've landed." Steve looked at the ship, at the rebels offering him passage into an unknown conflict, at the city behind him crawling with soldiers hunting a man who didn't belong in their universe. He'd made harder choices. He climbed the ramp. Behind them, in the Imperial Garrison Command Center, Agent Callus reviewed the footage from the tunnel security cameras. The man in the strange armor, moving with purpose. The Twi'lek resistance operative. The Lazat rebel. Callus smiled thinly. Let them run. Let them think they'd escaped. The best way to find a rebel cell was to let them capture an asset valuable enough to take back to their headquarters. And this stranger, this, Captain Rogers, was very valuable indeed. Callus opened a secure channel to Imperial Center. This information needed to reach someone with the authority to understand its implications. Someone who dealt with unusual threats as a matter of course. Someone like an Inquisitor. Or better still, someone like Lord Vader himself. The safe house was built into the remains of an old communications tower 20 kilometers outside Capital City, hidden among rock formations that shielded it from casual Imperial scans. Steve stood on the observation platform as the twin suns set, painting the alien sky in shades of orange and purple that Earth's single sun had never managed. Inside, he could hear voices, Numa coordinating with someone over a comm system, Zeb checking weapons, other rebels whose names he hadn't learned yet moving with the practiced efficiency of people living on borrowed time. A woman emerged onto the platform, carrying two containers that steamed in the cooling evening air. She was green-skinned like Numa but with different markings, her lekku bound back in a practical style. Military bearing. Officer's posture. Steve recognized command presence when he saw it. "Nutrition paste," she said, offering him one of the containers. "It's not appetizing, but it keeps you functional. I'm told you've had an interesting day, Captain Rogers." Steve accepted the container, noting the woman's careful distance, close enough to talk, far enough to react if he proved hostile. "You could say that. I woke up on a planet I've never heard of, got shot at by soldiers from an empire I don't understand, and now I'm drinking dinner with rebels who think I might be a spy. Do you blame us?" She leaned against the railing, studying him with eyes that had seen too many battles. A man appears from nowhere, takes down 6 stormtroopers without a scratch, and carries a shield made of material our scanners can't identify. Either you're the luckiest smuggler in the galaxy or you're something else entirely. I'm Hera Syndulla. I run this cell. Steve Rogers. Captain, formerly of the United States Army. He sipped the nutrition paste. It tasted like chalk mixed with vague hints of protein. And I'm not a spy. Formerly. Hera's head tilted slightly. What happened to your army? It won its war 70 years ago. I missed most of the celebration by being frozen in ice. Steve saw her expression shift toward skepticism. I know how it sounds. Where I come from, that's just Tuesday. Frozen in ice, Hera repeated slowly. For 70 years. And you survived. Enhanced physiology. Experimental serum designed to push human capability to its theoretical peak. Steve gestured at himself. Strength, speed, healing factor, metabolism that can survive conditions that would kill normal people. Including, apparently, being shot through dimensional barriers into a galaxy that doesn't know Earth exists. Hera was quiet for a moment, processing. Steve had learned to recognize that particular silence, the moment when intelligent people decided whether to believe something impossible or conclude they were dealing with a madman. Show me, she said finally. Steve set down the container, picked up a piece of debris from the platform, a chunk of metal that must have weighed 50 pounds, and bent it in half with his bare hands. The metal groaned and folded like paper. He dropped it and turned back to Hera, whose expression had shifted from skepticism to calculation. "Enhanced physiology," she said. "Not cybernetics. Not force sensitivity. Biological augmentation. The super soldier serum," Steve confirmed. "Designed to create perfect soldiers. It worked exactly once, and the scientist who created it was killed before he could replicate the process. I'm the only one. Which makes you unique. Valuable. Dangerous." Hera's hand hadn't moved toward her weapon, but Steve noticed it remained within easy reach. "And you're telling me this because I'm tired of being lied to, and I won't start a relationship with people I might need to trust by hiding what I am." Steve met her eyes steadily. "I don't know your rebellion. I don't know your empire. I don't even know what galaxy I'm standing in. But I know occupied territory when I see it, and I know fear when I smell it. Those people in Capital City aren't afraid of criminals. They're afraid of their own government." "The Galactic Empire," Hera said. 20 years ago, it was the Republic, a democratic union of systems that had stood for 1,000 generations. Then came the Clone Wars, and a politician named Palpatine who promised security. By the time people realized what they'd traded for that security, it was too late. The Republic became the Empire. Democracy became dictatorship. And anyone who objected learned what imperial justice looked like. Steve had heard this story before. Different names, different planets, same pattern. And the Jedi? Hera's expression hardened. "How do you know about the Jedi?" "Your friend Numa mentioned something about force sensitivity when she was explaining why I wasn't one. I'm assuming they're relevant. They were the Republic's peacekeepers. Warrior monks who could use an energy field called the Force. It flows through all living things, connects the galaxy, gives them abilities that seem like magic. Telekinesis. Precognition. Mind influence." Hera looked out toward the darkening horizon. "The Empire hunted them to extinction. Declared them traitors. Killed them by the thousands. There might be a handful left hiding in the Outer Rim, but the Jedi Order is gone." Steve felt something cold settle in his chest. Genocide dressed up as security policy. Hydra had tried the same with Project Insight, identify threats before they acted, eliminate them preemptively. The scale was different, but the philosophy was identical. "And your rebellion fights them," Steve said. "The Empire. You're trying to restore the Republic. Some of us are. Others just want to hurt the Empire badly enough that it leaves their home systems alone. Others want revenge for what was taken from them." Hera turned back to face him. "We're not a unified force with clear goals, Captain Rogers. We're cells scattered across the galaxy, barely coordinating, often disagreeing on tactics and philosophy. But we all agree on one thing: the Empire needs to fall. And you think I can help with that? I think a man who can take down 6 stormtroopers without breaking a sweat could be useful in a fight. But more than that," Hera paused, weighing her words. "The Empire rules through fear. Fear of their military power, fear of their Inquisitors, fear of what happens if you resist. A symbol that can't be intimidated, can't be killed, can't be broken, that would be worth more than a dozen star cruisers." Steve understood what she was suggesting. He'd been a symbol before. Captain America, the living embodiment of American ideals, paraded across the European theater to sell war bonds and boost morale. He'd hated it then. Dancing monkey in a star-spangled costume while real soldiers died fighting a war he wasn't allowed to join. But then he'd taken the fight to Hydra, and the symbol had meant something. It had given people hope when the Reich seemed invincible. "I'm not joining a rebellion I don't understand," Steve said carefully. "I won't fight for it 'cause I haven't vetted, and I won't be someone's propaganda piece just because I wear a flag and carry a shield. I wouldn't ask you to." Hera's voice was steady, respectful. But I am asking you to learn. See what the Empire has done to worlds like Lothal. Meet the people fighting back. Understand what's at stake. And then, if you decide this isn't your fight, we'll help you find a way home if one exists. And if I decide it is my fight? Then we'll teach you how to fight a war across star systems instead of continents. How to hit targets you'll never see with your own eyes. How to accept that victory might not come in your lifetime. Hera's expression softened slightly. You said you were frozen for 70 years. That you missed the celebration when your war was won. Maybe that's why you're here, Captain. Maybe the galaxy needs a soldier who understands that some fights are worth starting even if you won't live to see them finished. Steve was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars emerge in the alien sky. Constellations he didn't recognize. A galaxy too vast for one man to protect. But that had never stopped him before. I'll stay, he said finally. Long enough to understand what I'm looking at. Long enough to see if your rebellion deserves what I could offer. But I make no promises beyond that. Fair enough. Hera extended her hand. Welcome to the rebellion, Captain Rogers. I hope you survive the orientation. Steve shook her hand, feeling the calluses of someone who'd flown combat missions and lived to tell about it. I usually do. Inside the Ghost's communication room, Numa watched the exchange through the viewport. Zeb stood beside her, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Think he'll join? Zeb asked. I think he's a soldier without a war, Numa said. Those are either the most dangerous people in the galaxy or the most useful. We'll find out which. Hera's taking a risk trusting him this fast. Hera's taking a risk every time we breathe in the Empire's direction. Numa pulled up a holographic display showing Imperial chatter across Lothal. But look at this, 8 separate patrol units scrambled, 3 garrison commanders reprimanded for letting him escape, and a priority alert sent to Coruscant. The Empire's scared of him, Zeb. They're scared of one man with a shield. They should be, Zeb said, remembering the footage Numa had shown him. The way the stranger moved, the way he disarmed trained soldiers like they were children playing at war. Question is, will that fear make them cautious or reckless? With the Empire? Numa smiled without humor. Always reckless. 3 star systems away, aboard the Imperial Star Destroyer Devastator, Agent Callus stood in a communications room watching the same footage on repeat. The stranger. The shield. The impossible speed and precision. He'd sent his report directly to Imperial intelligence with a priority flag. Within an hour, he'd received a response that made his blood run cold. Subject of interest. Observe but do not engage. Inquisitorius alerted. Lord Vader personally reviewing case file. Callus closed the communication and stared at the frozen image of the man in the strange armor. Who are you? He thought. And what are you going to cost us? Somewhere in the depths of space, Darth Vader stood in his meditation chamber, watching the same footage through the cold clarity of the Force. The man moved like a warrior. Fought like someone who'd faced death and learned to dance with it. But there was something else. Something Vader couldn't quite identify. The Force flowed around the stranger but not through him. Like water parting around a stone. Not resistant to the Force, simply separate from it, existing in the galaxy but not connected to its fundamental energy. Fascinating. And potentially very, very dangerous. Vader closed his meditation chamber and reached out through the Force, searching for the presence of the Inquisitors under his command. He would need his hunters for this. The rebellion had found itself a new symbol. It was time to break it. The interrogation room was a converted storage bay with minimal furnishings, a table, 2 chairs, and overhead lighting that cast harsh shadows across faces. Steve sat across from a rebel intelligence officer named Lieutenant Vors, a human with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too many friends die. For the past 3 hours, Vors had been asking questions. Where was Steve born? Brooklyn. When? 1918, how did he arrive on Lothal? Dimensional accident involving technology he barely understood. What were his capabilities? Enhanced strength, speed, endurance, accelerated healing. What were his intentions? To understand where he was and determine if he could help. Vors made notes on a datapad, occasionally pausing to verify information against some internal database Steve couldn't see. The man's professionalism reminded Steve of Colonel Phillips, skeptical by training, willing to be convinced by evidence. Your story is problematic, Vors said finally, setting down the datapad. No record of Earth in any galactic archive. No record of your United States or this Hydra organization you claim to have fought. Your technology, he gestured at Steve's shield, which lay on the table between them, doesn't match any known metallurgical composition. You're either telling the truth about being from another dimension, or you're the most elaborate intelligence operation I've encountered in 20 years. If I were an Imperial intelligence operation, Steve said calmly, would I have assaulted 6 stormtroopers and made myself the most wanted person on Lothal? If your goal was to infiltrate the rebellion at the highest levels? Yes. Vors leaned back in his chair. The Empire spent years trying to identify our leadership. A super soldier who appears to be fleeing Imperial forces, who demonstrates capabilities that make him immediately valuable, that would be an excellent way to gain our trust. Steve had to admit the logic was sound. In Vors' position, he'd be asking the same questions. What would convince you I'm legitimate? Steve asked. Honestly? Nothing will, completely. Not for months, maybe years. We'll verify what we can, watch for inconsistencies in your story, and hope that if you are Imperial intelligence, you make a mistake before people die. Vors picked up the shield, testing its weight. But Hera believes you're genuine. She's been reading people for 15 years and she's rarely wrong. That buys you operational trust, Captain Rogers. Limited trust, but trust nonetheless. And if I violate that trust? Vors set the shield down with a metallic ring. Then you'll learn that rebels can be just as ruthless as the Empire when survival is at stake. The door opened before Steve could respond. Hera entered, followed by a protocol droid painted in faded bronze and an astromech that beeped in a language Steve didn't understand but somehow felt expressive. We have a problem, Hera said without preamble. Imperial communications are lit up. They're mobilizing a serious response to our new arrival. Define serious, Vors said, already standing. 3 additional Star Destroyers en route to Lothal. Garrison forces doubled. And, Hera's expression tightened, an Inquisitor is coming. 5th brother, based on the encryption signature. The room went very quiet. What's an Inquisitor? Steve asked. Vors and Hera exchanged looks. The protocol droid, who introduced himself as C-3PO with excessive courtesy, stepped forward. Inquisitors are agents of the Empire trained in the ways of the Force, sir. They hunt down remaining Jedi and Force-sensitive individuals, though their duties have expanded to include hunting high-value rebel targets. They are, if I may say so, quite terrifying. Force users, Steve said, remembering Hera's explanation. Like the Jedi. Like the Jedi used to be, Hera corrected. But twisted. The Inquisitors serve the dark side, anger, fear, hatred. They use the Force as a weapon, and they're nearly impossible to fight if you're not Force-sensitive yourself. She met Steve's eyes. They want you, Captain. The Empire's sending someone with the power to read minds, move objects with thought, and see the future. Your enhanced strength won't matter if he can choke you from across a room or predict your every move. Steve absorbed this information with the practiced calm of someone who'd faced impossible odds before. How many have you fought? Personally? None, and lived to tell about it. Other cells have encountered them. The survival rate is approximately 12%. Vors pulled up a holographic display showing a humanoid figure in dark armor. They carry lightsabers, Plasma blades that can cut through nearly anything. They're trained in multiple combat styles. And they're fanatics who believe the Empire represents order in a chaotic galaxy. The image rotated, showing the Inquisitor from multiple angles. The figure's helmet was designed to intimidate, all sharp angles and red accents. The weapon, lightsaber, looked lethal, elegant, and utterly foreign to Steve's experience. So the Empire's sending their best, Steve said. Because they're afraid of what one enhanced soldier represents. They're afraid of what you could become if you join the rebellion, Hera said. A symbol. Living proof that the Empire can be challenged by individuals, not just fleets and armies. They'll want to kill you publicly, make an example that demonstrates resistance is futile. Steve picked up his shield, feeling its familiar weight. He'd been hunted before, by Hydra, by governments that feared what Captain America represented, by enemies who understood that symbols could inspire more effectively than any weapon. Then we don't give them that opportunity, Steve said. What's the plan? Evacuate this location immediately, Vors said. Move you to a secondary safe house in the Western Territories. Keep you hidden until we can arrange transport off-world. Running. Steve's voice was flat. That's the plan. Surviving, Hera corrected. You've been here less than a day, Captain. You don't know this galaxy, don't know the Empire's capabilities, don't know how to fight Force users. Staying here is suicide. Staying here is a fight, Steve countered. And running just tells the Empire that they're right to be afraid. That whoever this Inquisitor is, he's powerful enough to make the rebellion retreat before he even arrives. You can't fight an Inquisitor, Vors said, frustration creeping into his voice. Listen to what we're telling you, these aren't stormtroopers you can disarm with a shield. These are trained Force wielders with abilities you can't counter. Steve stood, shield on his arm. I've fought gods, Lieutenant. I've faced down threats that could level cities with a thought. I've gone up against enemies who were faster, stronger, and better armed than I was. And I won because I didn't run, didn't compromise, and didn't let fear dictate tactics. He looked at Hera. If this Inquisitor is coming for me, then let him come. But we face him on our terms, in a place of our choosing, with every advantage we can manufacture. You're talking about an ambush, Hera said slowly. I'm talking about fighting smart instead of running scared. Steve moved to the holographic display, studying the Inquisitor's image. You said they're predictable, they hunt high-value targets. So we make me visible. Draw him to a location where his force powers are less effective. Where I can use terrain and preparation to level the battlefield. It's insane, Vors said. It's also the most tactically sound plan we've had in months, Hera admitted. The ghost of a smile crossed her face. The Empire expects us to run. They're preparing for a manhunt across Lothal, sweeping sectors, interrogating civilians. If we turn this into a direct confrontation, it changes everything. It gets people killed, Vors argued. Our people. Civilians caught in the crossfire when this goes wrong. And running gets civilians interrogated, Steve said quietly. I've seen what occupying forces do when they're looking for someone. They lean on the local population. They make examples. They turn entire communities into targets until someone breaks and provides information. He'd seen it in Nazi-occupied Europe, seen it in villages that paid the price for hiding resistance fighters. If this Inquisitor is coming, people will suffer whether I'm here or not. At least this way, we control the battlefield. Hera was quiet for a long moment, tactical calculations running behind her eyes. Finally, she turned to Vors. Contact Sabine and Ezra. Tell them we need an ambush site prepared in the industrial sector, somewhere with heavy machinery that can interfere with Force senses. And get cannon on comms. If we're fighting an Inquisitor, we need someone who understands the Force. Cannon? Steve asked. Someone you should meet, Hera said. Before you commit to this completely insane plan. Canon Jarrus arrived 2 hours later, slipping into the safe house with the kind of practiced silence that spoke to years of avoiding detection. He was human, late 20s or early 30s, with a beard that suggested he'd been living rough and eyes that carried the weight of surviving something that should have killed him. He stopped when he saw Steve, hand moving unconsciously toward the weapon at his belt. "You're the one causing all the trouble," Canon said. "Apparently." Steve extended his hand. "Steve Rogers." Canon shook it, grip firm but cautious. "Canon Jarrus. Hera tells me you want to fight an Inquisitor." "I want to survive an Inquisitor. Fighting him is just the method. There's a difference between surviving and winning." Canon moved to the table where Steve's shield rested. He didn't touch it, but his eyes studied the artifact with interest. The fifth brother is one of the more brutal Inquisitors. Strong in the dark side, trained in aggressive lightsaber combat, and he enjoys making his kills personal. If you're planning to face him, you need to understand what you're up against. Hera said he can read minds. Force users can sense emotions, intentions, surface thoughts. With training and focus, they can dig deeper. But, Canon tilted his head, studying Steve with an intensity that felt like being examined under a microscope. "You're different. I've been trying to sense you since I walked in, and it's like you're not quite there. I can see you, hear you, but the Force doesn't register your presence the way it does with other living beings. Is that good or bad? Honestly, I have no idea. It might mean an Inquisitor can't predict your movements the way they would with normal opponents. Or it might mean nothing at all." Canon finally sat down, his posture relaxing slightly. "Hera trusts you. That's enough for me to give you a chance. But understand, if this goes wrong, if civilians die because we stood and fought instead of running, that weight falls on all of us." Steve had carried that weight before. Every mission that risked collateral damage, every fight in an urban environment, every choice that prioritized strategic victory over individual safety. Command meant accepting that sometimes people died despite your best efforts. "I've made that calculation before," Steve said quietly. "I don't make it lightly." "Good." Canon stood. "Then let's prepare to fight an Inquisitor. And hope that whatever makes you invisible to the Force is enough to keep you alive." Outside the safe house, hidden among the rocks, an Imperial probe droid recorded the conversation and transmitted it across encrypted channels toward the approaching Star Destroyers. The fifth brother received the transmission in his meditation chamber and smiled behind his mask. A challenge. How delightful. The industrial sector of Capital City was a maze of machinery and shadow, refinery towers that reached toward the pale sky, conveyor systems that had rusted silent under Imperial efficiency mandates, storage tanks large enough to hide a dozen soldiers. Steve stood on a catwalk overlooking the designated ambush site, studying the terrain with the tactical eye of someone who'd planned operations in occupied territory. Sabine Wren worked beside him, applying charges to structural support beams with the precision of an artist. She was young, 17, maybe 18, with armor painted in colors that seemed designed to offend Imperial sensibilities. Mandalorian, Canon had explained, from a warrior culture that valued skill and honor above all else. "You're quiet," Sabine said without looking up from her work. "Most people who are about to fight an Inquisitor are either praying or panicking. You're just standing there like you're planning a parade route." "I'm visualizing the fight," Steve said. "Entry points, exit strategies, where he'll have advantage and where we can take it away. You do this before every battle. Set explosives to collapse buildings on Force users." Sabine grinned behind her helmet. "First time. Usually I just paint protest art and avoid getting killed. This is significantly more exciting." Steve watched her place another charge with movements that spoke to extensive training. "Canon said you're Mandalorian. That's a warrior culture. Was. Is. Complicated." Sabine's voice carried an edge of something painful. "Mandalore has a long history of fighting and dying gloriously. Some of us still believe in that. Others think the old ways died with the Republic. I'm still figuring out which side I'm on. And the armor? Traditional. Every Mandalorian earns their armor through trials and training. The paint scheme is personal, represents your achievements, your clan, your identity. Mine, she gestured at the vibrant patterns, represents someone who's probably going to get killed doing something reckless before she figures out who she's supposed to be. Steve understood that particular struggle. He'd spent years trying to figure out if he was Steve Rogers or Captain America, the man or the symbol. Sometimes the line blurred until he couldn't tell the difference. The armor's Beskar? Steve asked, remembering Hera's briefing. The real stuff. One of the few things the Empire hasn't managed to completely strip from Mandalorian culture. Beskar's nearly indestructible, lightsabers can't cut it, blasters barely scratch it. If I wasn't wearing this, I'd have been dead 3 missions ago. Sabine finished placing her charge and moved to the next support beam. That shield of yours, what's it made of? Vibranium. Metal from a meteorite that crashed into Africa centuries ago. Absorbs kinetic energy, nearly indestructible, lighter than steel. It saved my life more times than I can count. Sounds like we both fight with the past protecting us. Sabine's helmet tilted toward him. Difference is, my armor has centuries of Mandalorian warriors behind it. Your shield just has you. That's been enough so far. Let's hope it stays that way. Ezra Bridger appeared on the catwalk below them, moving with the kind of nervous energy that marked him as the youngest member of the crew. 16 years old, Force-sensitive according to canon, and training to be something the Empire had tried to erase, a Jedi. Canon says the fifth brother's ship just entered the system, Ezra called up. We've got maybe an hour before he lands. Steve climbed down to meet him. Up close, the kid looked even younger, someone who should have been worrying about school instead of fighting an empire. But his eyes carried the hardness of someone who'd survived things that killed softer people. You're the Force-sensitive one, Steve said. Can you feel him coming? Ezra's expression went distant for a moment, like he was listening to something Steve couldn't hear. Yeah. He's angry. Focused. The dark side feels like ice water in your veins, and he's radiating it like a furnace radiates heat. Canon says that's good for us, emotions make Force users predictable. But it also makes them dangerous. Everything about Inquisitors is dangerous, Captain Rogers. They're trained to kill Jedi, and Jedi had decades of training. We're amateurs compared to what they're used to hunting. Ezra's hand moved to the lightsaber at his belt, cobbled together from parts, Canon had mentioned, built by the kid himself. But Canon also says the dark side makes you arrogant. Makes you think you're invincible because you've embraced power. Maybe that gives us an opening. Steve had fought arrogant enemies before. Confidence was useful until it crossed into overconfidence, and then it became a weakness to exploit. Your job is staying alive, Steve said. Not engaging him directly. If this goes wrong, you and Sabine fall back to the secondary positions and blow the charges. Understood? I'm not running while you fight an Inquisitor alone, Ezra said, teenage defiance cutting through tactical sense. You're not running. You're making sure the plan works. Steve kept his voice level, the tone he'd used with young soldiers in the Howling Commandos who didn't understand the difference between bravery and suicide. I need someone watching the exits, ready to adjust if he doesn't move the way we expect. That's not cowardice. That's tactics. Ezra looked like he wanted to argue, but Canon's voice cut through the discussion. He's right, Ezra. We each have our role. Yours is support and extraction. Mine is providing Force cover. The captain's is being the target. Canon emerged from the shadows of the refinery, moving with the careful grace of someone who'd learned to hide in plain sight. He carried a lightsaber, a weapon Steve had only seen in holographic briefings, but now recognized as the Jedi's signature tool. You can use the Force, Steve said. Why not you as the primary target? Because the fifth brother knows I exist. He's hunted me before, nearly killed me twice. He'll expect Force sensitivity, expect Jedi tactics, expect someone he can predict. Kanan's expression was grim. He doesn't know. You're a variable he can't account for. That gives us maybe 30 seconds of confusion before he adapts. We need to make those seconds count. Hera's voice crackled through the comms. All teams in position. Zeb's covering the north approach with Numa's people. I'm on overwatch with the Ghost in case we need emergency extraction. C-3PO and Chopper are monitoring Imperial communications. They've gone quiet, which means the Inquisitor doesn't want interference. He wants this to be personal, Kanan said. Wants to prove he can handle a new threat without garrison support. Pride. That's good for us. Steve moved to the center of the ambush site, shield on his arm, studying the approaches one final time. Catwalks above, support pillars below, machinery that could provide cover or create choke points. He'd fought in worse terrain. The key was forcing the Inquisitor to fight Steve's kind of battle, close quarters, physical combat, places where force powers mattered less than skill and determination. When this starts, Steve said to the assembled team, remember, he'll try to intimidate you. Try to make you feel like resistance is futile. Don't believe it. He's powerful, but he's not invincible. We've planned for his abilities, prepared for his tactics. If we stay disciplined, we can win this. And if we can't? Sabine asked. Then we make him bleed, Steve said simply. Make him remember that the rebellion doesn't surrender. Make him report back to his masters that Lothal fights back. Even if we lose this battle, we win the message it sends. Kanan smiled slightly. You sound like a Jedi. That's exactly the kind of reckless optimism that got most of them killed. Lucky I'm not a Jedi then. The rumble of atmospheric engines cut through the conversation. Steve looked up to see a distinctive Imperial shuttle descending through the pale sky, angular, threatening, designed to announce its arrival with authority. It landed 200 meters from their position, repulsor lifts kicking up dust that glowed in the double sunlight. The boarding ramp lowered with hydraulic precision. A figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark armor that seemed to absorb light. The helmet was a stylized mask that hid any trace of humanity, decorated with red markings that matched the lightsaber hilt at his belt. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight, never questioned his purpose, never doubted that the Empire's will was absolute. The fifth brother had arrived. Steve felt his heartbeat steady, adrenaline sharpening his senses the way it always did before combat. The super soldier serum pushed his physiology into combat readiness, muscles primed, reflexes heightened, mind clear and focused. The Inquisitor's helmet turned slowly, scanning the industrial sector. When it fixed on Steve's position, there was a moment of perfect stillness. Then the fifth brother laughed. It wasn't transmitted through speakers or amplified electronically. The sound carried across the empty space through the Force itself, resonating in a way that made Ezra flinch and Kanan's hand move to his lightsaber. So, the Inquisitor's voice boomed, deep and contemptuous. This is the anomaly that has occupied the Empire's attention. A soldier in a costume carrying a primitive shield. The rebellion grows more desperate if they believe you represent hope. Steve didn't respond. Words were tactics, and giving information was giving advantage. The fifth brother began walking forward, his pace measured and unhurried. You cannot sense me through the Force. You do not understand the power that flows through this galaxy. You are blind, deaf, and ignorant, a creature stumbling through darkness while I see everything. 50 meters. Steve raised his shield, setting his stance. The Inquisitor's confidence was a weapon, designed to make opponents doubt themselves before the fight even began. Steve had seen psychological warfare before. He didn't flinch. The Empire has faced rebels for 20 years, the Inquisitor continued, still approaching. We have crushed resistance on 1,000 worlds. We have hunted the Jedi to extinction. What makes you believe you can stand against power that has toppled an order that stood for 1,000 generations? 30 meters. Steve's tactical mind catalogued everything. The Inquisitor's gate suggested training in multiple combat styles, the lightsaber hilt was double-bladed based on the activation stud configuration, the armor showed no obvious weak points. Force powers were the unknown variable. Telekinesis, precognition, mind influence, tools Steve had never fought against. But every weapon had counters. Every power had limits. The fifth brother stopped 20 meters away and ignited his lightsaber. The weapon sprang to life with a sound like reality tearing, twin crimson blades extending from both ends of the hilt, spinning with mechanical precision. The light cast red shadows across the industrial sector, painting everything in the color of bloodshed. "You have courage, stranger," the Inquisitor said. "Courage is admirable. But courage without power is meaningless. I will make your death quick. Consider it mercy." The lightsaber began spinning faster, the blades becoming a crimson disk of plasma. And then the fifth brother moved. He crossed 20 meters in 3 seconds, impossibly fast, the force propelling him forward with speed that made Ezra's earlier demonstration look sluggish. The spinning lightsaber came at Steve's head in a strike designed to decapitate. Steve's shield came up on pure instinct. The lightsaber hit Vibranium with a sound like a thunderclap. The Inquisitor staggered backward, shocked, as his weapon, which had cut through blast doors and armor and Jedi Masters, skipped off the shield without leaving a mark. Steve didn't waste the opening. He lunged forward and drove his shield into the Inquisitor's chest with the full force of enhanced strength behind it. The fifth brother flew backward, crashed through a storage container, and came up snarling with rage. "Impossible," the Inquisitor hissed. Steve set his stance again, shield ready. "Let's find out," he said. The fifth brother attacked with renewed fury, lightsaber spinning in complex patterns that would have overwhelmed any normal opponent. Steve moved like he was dancing, shield deflecting strikes, body twisting through angles that avoided the plasma blades by millimeters, feet positioning him for counters that never came because the Inquisitor was already retreating. This wasn't like fighting Hydra agents or even enhanced opponents. The Inquisitor moved with precognitive awareness, adjusting his attacks before Steve fully committed to them. Every feint Steve attempted was anticipated. Every opening he tried to exploit closed before he could capitalize. The Force gave the fifth brother an edge that training couldn't overcome. But it didn't make him invincible. Steve slammed his shield into the ground, using the impact to propel himself sideways as the lightsaber carved through the space where he'd been standing. Metal screamed and melted. Steve rolled, came up behind a support pillar, and threw his shield. The vibranium disc sailed through the air with perfect aerodynamics, struck the Inquisitor's helmet with enough force to dent Beskar, and rebounded toward a second pillar. The fifth brother staggered, disoriented, and Steve was already moving. He caught his shield on the rebound, closed the distance, and drove his fist into the Inquisitor's midsection. The armor absorbed most of the impact, but not all of it. The fifth brother wheezed and lashed out with the force. Steve felt invisible pressure slam into his chest like a battering ram. He flew backward, crashed into a storage tank, and felt the breath driven from his lungs. Pain exploded across his ribs, not broken, the serum would prevent that, but bruised badly enough that breathing hurt. The Inquisitor advanced, lightsaber raised. You fight well for someone blind to the Force. But physical prowess means nothing when I can crush your throat with a thought. Steve felt the pressure tighten around his neck. Invisible fingers constricting, cutting off air, the kind of attack that bypassed armor and shields and physical defense. He clawed at his throat instinctively, trying to remove hands that weren't there. The fifth brother lifted him into the air telekinetically. Steve's feet kicked uselessly 6 inches above the ground. "This is how the Jedi died," the Inquisitor said, voice calm and measured. "Struggling against power they couldn't resist. The Force is absolute, stranger. And you are nothing before it. Steve's vision began to tunnel. Hypoxia setting in despite enhanced physiology. The serum could slow asphyxiation but not prevent it. He had maybe 30 seconds before unconsciousness. His hand found a concussion grenade on his belt, rebellion tech, provided by Sabine for emergencies. Steve pulled the pin and dropped it. The explosion wasn't large, but at close range it didn't need to be. The shockwave disrupted the Inquisitor's concentration, and the telekinetic grip vanished. Steve dropped, gasped air into his lungs, and rolled away as the lightsaber carved through the space where he'd fallen. "Cannon, now!" Steve shouted. A green lightsaber blade ignited from the catwalk above, and Cannon dropped into the fight with Jedi precision. His blade met the Inquisitors in a shower of sparks, light against dark, controlled technique against aggressive power. Jairus, the fifth brother, snarled. "I should have known you'd be too cowardly to face me alone." "I learned from the best," Cannon replied, his blade work forcing the Inquisitor back. "The Jedi never fought alone. We believed in teamwork, cooperation, trusting the people around us. Something the Inquisitors forgot when they embraced the dark side." The two Force users dueled across the industrial sector, lightsabers creating patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. Steve recovered his breath and moved to flank, staying just outside the immediate combat zone but close enough to intervene. He watched how Cannon fought, defensive forms, patient techniques, waiting for the Inquisitor to overextend. The fifth brother fought like a brawler, all aggression and power, using his strength to batter through defenses. The spinning lightsaber was a psychological tool as much as a weapon, designed to intimidate and overwhelm. But Cannon wasn't intimidated, and Steve could see the pattern now. The Inquisitor would lunge forward with a spinning strike, Cannon would deflect and retreat, the fifth brother would press the advantage. Steve threw his shield during the next advance. The vibranium disc hit the spinning lightsaber at precisely the wrong angle for the Inquisitor's momentum. The weapon flew from his hands, deactivated, and clattered across the ground 15 feet away. The fifth brother reached out with the force to retrieve it. Steve charged. He covered the distance before the lightsaber could return to its master's hand and drove his shoulder into the Inquisitor's chest. They went down together, rolling across metal flooring, Steve landing 3 punches before the force blasted him away again. But those 3 punches had done damage. The Inquisitor's helmet was cracked now, showing glimpses of red skin and burning yellow eyes underneath. "You dare," the fifth brother hissed, rage overwhelming tactical sense. "You dare." Sabine's voice crackled through the comms. "Charges armed. Say the word, Captain." The Inquisitor heard it through the Force or through technology, Steve couldn't tell which. But he turned toward Sabine's position on the catwalk, raising his hand, and Steve saw murder in his body language. "Now!" Steve shouted. Explosions bloomed across the industrial sector. Support beams shattered. Catwalks collapsed. The refinery tower that had stood for 20 years groaned and began to fall, thousands of tons of dura-steel and machinery toppling like a dying giant. The fifth brother threw up a force barrier, stopping debris that would have crushed him. But the effort cost him, concentration diverted, attention split between offense and defense. Cannon seized the opportunity. His green blade struck the Inquisitor's armor in 3 precise locations: chest, shoulder, thigh. Lightsaber-resistant armor held, but the impact still transferred kinetic force. The fifth brother staggered. Steve's shield hit him from behind. The Inquisitor went down, helmet finally cracking completely, revealing a Zobric face twisted with fury. He reached for his lightsaber through the Force, but Ezra, who'd been hidden in the debris, kicked it away with timing born from Cannon's training. 3 against 1, the fifth brother spat. The rebellion fights without honor. Honor? Cannon's voice was cold. You serve an empire that committed genocide against the Jedi Order. You hunt down children with Force sensitivity and kill them before they can be trained. You talk about honor while enforcing tyranny. Don't lecture us about morality. Steve stepped forward, shield raised. Last chance. Stand down. Leave Lothal. Tell your masters that the rebellion isn't as weak as they think. The Inquisitor laughed, a broken, desperate sound. You don't understand what you've done. Lord Vader will hear of this. He will come for you personally. And when he does, you'll beg for the mercy you denied me. Who's Vader? Steve asked. The fifth brother's expression shifted to something like pity. You truly are from elsewhere, aren't you? Ignorant of the powers that rule this galaxy. Vader is the Emperor's enforcer, the hand of the dark side made manifest. Compared to him, I am nothing. And you, he looked at Steve with something approaching respect, you are already dead. You just don't know it yet. Movement in the shadows caught Steve's attention. More figures emerging from the fallen debris, not rebels, but stormtroopers. A dozen of them, weapons raised, taking position around the ambush site. Agent Kallus stepped into view, carrying a weapon that sparked with electrical energy. A commendable effort, Kallus said, voice calm and professional. But did you truly believe the Empire would send an Inquisitor without backup? The fifth brother's pride made him engage alone. His tactical error does not extend to Imperial intelligence. Hera's voice cut through the comms, urgent. Steve, we've got TIE fighters inbound. 2 full squadrons. They're jamming our communications. I can't reach the other cells. Steve looked at their position, surrounded by stormtroopers, TIE fighters converging, an injured but still dangerous Inquisitor on the ground, and rebels who just exhausted their prepared explosives. Tactical assessment, they'd won the battle but walked into a larger trap. Cannon, Steve said quietly. Get Ezra and Sabine out. Fall back to the Ghost. We're not leaving you. That's an order. Steve's voice carried the authority of someone who'd commanded men in life-or-death situations. You stay, we all die. You leave, you fight another day. Go. Cannon hesitated for 1 second, one precious second where duty warred with loyalty, then grabbed Ezra and Sabine. Fall back. Rendezvous Point Delta. They moved like ghosts, disappearing into the industrial sector's maze of machinery and shadow. Stormtroopers fired, but Cannon's lightsaber deflected bolts while Sabine laid down covering fire. Within seconds, they were gone. Steve stood alone, surrounded, shield raised. Kallus smiled thinly. Captain Rogers. The Empire would like to have a conversation with you. I'm not much for conversation with fascists. Fascist. Kallus tested the word. I don't know the term, but I understand the contempt. You see us as tyrants. Oppressors. But tell me, do you know what the galaxy was like before the Empire? Chaos. Corruption. Systems warring with each other while the Republic debated endlessly and accomplished nothing. The Emperor brought order from that chaos. Purpose from confusion. I've heard that speech before, Steve said. Different language, same lies. Order built on fear isn't peace. It's just unopposed violence. Philosophical debate is above my station. Kallus gestured to his stormtroopers. You're outnumbered 20-1. Your shield cannot deflect blaster bolts from every direction simultaneously. Surrender, and you'll be treated according to Imperial protocols. Resist, and we'll take you by force. Either way, you're coming with us. The fifth brother had recovered enough to stand, retrieving his lightsaber with the Force. I claim this prisoner for the Inquisitorius. He has information about countering Force abilities. Your claim is noted, Kallus said with bureaucratic precision. However, Lord Vader has expressed personal interest in Captain Rogers. Until we receive clarification on jurisdiction, he will be held in Imperial custody. Steve's mind raced through options. 20 stormtroopers, 1 Inquisitor, and Kallus who moved like he knew how to fight. Running would get him shot. Fighting would get him killed or captured. Surrendering meant interrogation, imprisonment, possibly execution. But it also meant keeping the heat off the rebels. Meant Hera and her crew could escape. Meant the rebellion survived to fight another day. Sometimes surrender was the most tactical option available. Steve lowered his shield slowly, setting it on the ground. Smart choice, Kallus said. Stun him. I want him conscious but unable to resist. Blue energy bolts hit Steve from 3 directions simultaneously. The super soldier serum fought the stun effect, keeping him conscious longer than normal, but even enhanced physiology had limits. The last thing Steve saw before darkness claimed him was the fifth brother's damaged helmet, and the promise in those yellow eyes. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Steve woke to the hum of starship engines and the smell of recycled air. His head pounded from the stun bolt's aftereffects, and his wrists were locked in binders that glowed with some kind of energy field. He was in a detention cell, small, sterile, with walls that looked like they could withstand significant force. A containment field shimmered across the doorway, crackling with barely restrained energy. He tested the binders. Strong. Not unbreakable, but breaking them would require time he probably didn't have. The super soldier serum was already processing the stun effect out of his system, pushing the neural disruption aside with enhanced metabolic efficiency. Within minutes, Steve's head cleared and his tactical assessment began. Imperial Star Destroyer, based on the engine vibration. Unknown location, probably already jumped to hyperspace. No visible security cameras, but that didn't mean he wasn't being watched. His shield was gone, confiscated, obviously. His tactical suit remained, though they'd stripped his belt equipment. The containment field dropped. Agent Kallus entered, carrying a datapad and accompanied by 2 stormtroopers. He studied Steve with the detached interest of someone examining an unusual specimen. Captain Rogers, Kallus said, settling into a chair that materialized from the wall. You've presented the Empire with a fascinating puzzle. No records in any database. Technology that doesn't match known manufacturing signatures. Combat abilities that exceed baseline human parameters. And most interesting, complete invisibility to force detection. Steve remained silent. Information was leverage, and he wasn't giving any away for free. The silent treatment is understandable but unproductive, Kallus continued. We'll eventually extract everything we need through interrogation, pharmaceutical intervention, or simple analysis of your physiology. But I'm offering you an alternative. Answer my questions voluntarily, and I'll ensure your treatment remains civil. No torture. No experimentation. Just conversation. Conversation, Steve repeated. Between a prisoner and his captor. That's not conversation. That's coercion with better manners. Fair assessment. Kallus made a note on his datapad. Let's start with something simple. Where did you acquire your shield? It was a gift. From whom? A friend who's been dead for 70 years. Kallus's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. You're referring to Howard Stark, according to the intelligence we extracted from your captured equipment. No records of this person exist. No records of your United States exist. No records of Earth exist in any galactic archive spanning 40,000 years. Which leads to 2 possibilities, either you're lying with exceptional commitment, or you're telling the truth about dimensional displacement. Steve filed that away. They'd analyzed his equipment thoroughly. Probably found traces of Earth technology that didn't match anything in their database. If you believe I'm from another dimension, Steve said, then you know I have no stake in your war. I'm not your enemy. I'm just trying to find a way home. Except you chose to ally with the rebellion. You chose to assault Imperial personnel. You chose to engage an Inquisitor in combat. Kallus leaned forward slightly. Those aren't the actions of someone who wants to avoid conflict. Those are the actions of someone who's chosen a side. I chose to defend myself against soldiers who opened fire without provocation. And I chose to stand against people who rule through fear. Steve met Callus's eyes steadily. I've fought fascists before, Agent. Different galaxy, same pattern. You can dress it up as order or security or necessary governance, but tyranny is tyranny regardless of the uniform. Fascist, Callus said again, testing the word. You use it like an accusation. Like you've encountered something similar before. Hydra. Nazi Germany. Regimes that promise strength through unity, order through obedience, peace through surrender. They all ended the same way, defeated by people who refused to bow. Steve's voice was quiet but firm. The Empire will end the same way. Maybe not today. Maybe not in my lifetime. But tyranny always falls eventually. An optimistic assessment considering your current circumstances. Callus stood. The Empire has ruled for 20 years, Captain Rogers. It controls thousands of systems, commands military forces beyond your comprehension, and is led by the most powerful force user the galaxy has ever known. Your rebellion, he said the word with faint contempt, consists of scattered cells barely coordinating their efforts, using outdated equipment and desperate tactics. What makes you believe they can win? Because people are worth fighting for, Steve said simply. Because freedom matters more than security. Because the moment you accept that tyranny is inevitable, you've already surrendered everything that makes life worth living. Callus was quiet for a moment, studying Steve like he was trying to understand an alien thought process. Then he shook his head. Ideology. The Empire has crushed 1,000 ideologies. Yours will be no different. He moved toward the door, then paused. Lord Vader arrives within the hour. I'd advise cooperation when he questions you. Unlike me, he has no interest in civil conversation. The containment field reactivated, and Steve was alone again. Vader. The fifth brother had mentioned that name with something approaching fear. The Emperor's enforcer. The hand of the dark side made manifest. Steve had faced powerful enemies before, but this galaxy operated on rules he didn't fully understand. The Force was real, he'd witnessed it, felt invisible hands crushing his throat, seen cannon and the Inquisitor manipulate energy in ways that defied physics. If Vader was more powerful than an Inquisitor, Steve needed to prepare for something beyond his experience. He tested the binders again, feeling for weaknesses. The energy field was strong, but energy had patterns. He pulled against them systematically, not trying to break free immediately but mapping how they responded to pressure. The super soldier serum gave him strength, but more importantly it gave him patience. He could work at this for hours if necessary. 30 minutes later, he'd identified a harmonic frequency in the binder's energy matrix. Not a weakness exactly, but a pattern he could exploit if he got the timing right. The containment field dropped again. This time, the figure who entered made the air itself feel heavier. Darth Vader stood 7 feet tall in armor that seemed to absorb light, a helmet that hid any trace of humanity, and a presence that made Steve's tactical instincts scream warnings. The sound of mechanical breathing filled the cell, rhythmic, unnatural, the sound of someone kept alive by technology and will alone. Captain Rogers, Vader's voice resonated through a vocabulator, deep and devoid of emotion. You have caused considerable disruption in a very short time. Steve stood slowly, meeting the eyeless gaze of Vader's helmet. I've had productive days. Indeed. Vader moved forward with measured steps. You interest me. The Force flows around you but does not touch you. Like a void in the fabric of reality. I have encountered Force-nullifying creatures, Force-resistant species, and beings who deliberately close themselves off from the Force. You are none of these. You simply exist outside its influence. Is that a problem? It is an anomaly. And anomalies in the Force often signify significant events. Vader stopped 3 feet away, close enough that Steve could see his reflection in the polished black helmet. Tell me about your world. It wasn't a request. Steve considered his options. Vader clearly had some kind of influence over technology and possibly minds. Fighting right now would be suicide. But information could be a weapon if wielded correctly. Earth, Steve said. One planet orbiting a single star. 7 billion people, mostly human. We've barely begun exploring our own solar system. No force, no lightsabers, no faster-than-light travel. Just people trying to figure out how to coexist without destroying each other. And yet you possess enhanced abilities. Science. Not supernatural power, just pushing human biology to its theoretical limits. Steve gestured at himself with his bound hands. We have technology that approaches what you'd call impossible, but it's all grounded in physics and chemistry and biological manipulation. Vader was silent for a long moment, the mechanical breathing the only sound in the cell. Then he raised one hand, and Steve felt invisible pressure wrap around his throat again. The telekinetic grip was different from the Inquisitors, more precise, more controlled, like a surgeon's hand instead of a bludgeon. Vader wasn't trying to kill him. He was testing. Steve forced himself to remain calm despite the pressure. The serum bought him time, letting him function longer under oxygen deprivation than normal humans. You resist well, Vader observed, releasing the grip. Your physiology is indeed remarkable. The Empire could benefit from studying how your enhancement was achieved. The scientist who created the serum destroyed his notes, Steve said, voice rough from the pressure. I'm the only successful subject. You can't replicate it. Perhaps. But your genetic material could provide insights. Vader's helmet tilted slightly. You fought the fifth brother to a standstill. Damaged an Inquisitor using only physical prowess and that shield. Such capabilities would be valuable to Imperial forces. Steve understood where this was going. You're offering me a job. I am offering you purpose. The rebellion is doomed, Captain Rogers. They lack resources, coordination, and most critically, they lack the power necessary to challenge the Empire's military supremacy. Your abilities would be wasted fighting for a lost cause. I've heard that before too, Steve said. Every tyrant thinks their victory is inevitable right up until they lose. The Sith thought themselves inevitable. The Jedi thought themselves eternal. Both were wrong. Vader's voice carried something that might have been amusement. The Empire is neither. It is simply necessary. Order requires strength. Peace requires control. Freedom, he said the word like it was poison, leads only to chaos and suffering. Freedom is the right of every sentient being, Steve countered. The right to choose their own path, make their own mistakes, live according to their own values. You can't force peace on people and call it justice. I was once as naive as you. Vader turned away, looking at nothing. I believed in freedom. In choice. In the Republic's ideals. Those beliefs cost me everything I loved. The dark side taught me what the Jedi could not, that power is the only truth that matters. With sufficient power, you can impose order. Prevent suffering. Ensure that tragedy never repeats. Steve heard something in Vader's voice, pain, buried beneath layers of mechanical distortion and dark side corruption. This wasn't just an enforcer. This was someone who'd lost something fundamental and rebuilt themselves around that loss. What did you lose? Steve asked quietly. The mechanical breathing stopped for 1 second. Then Vader turned back, and when he spoke, his voice was ice. That is none of your concern. You will work for the Empire, Captain Rogers. Willingly or otherwise. Your abilities are too valuable to waste. Your knowledge of dimensional travel is too important to ignore. And your resistance to the Force makes you uniquely suited for operations where Jedi remnants might interfere. I won't fight for tyrants. Then you will be broken until you do. Vader moved toward the door. I have seen stronger wills than yours shattered. I have watched Jedi Masters beg for death rather than continue enduring what the Empire can inflict. You are formidable, but you are not special. Everyone breaks eventually. The containment field reactivated, and Vader was gone, leaving only the sound of mechanical breathing echoing in Steve's mind. Steve sat back down, analyzing the conversation. Vader was powerful, but he was also damaged, someone who'd chosen the dark side not out of ambition but out of pain. That meant something. It meant there might be cracks in the armor, weak points that could be exploited. But more immediately, it meant Steve was running out of time. The Empire wanted to use him, study him, break him into a weapon they could control. He'd die before he let that happen. Which meant he needed to escape. The binder's harmonic frequency was still there, still vulnerable. Steve began working at it again, pulling systematically, testing the energy field's response. Hours passed. Maybe days. The cell had no windows, no way to track time beyond the irregular delivery of food and water. Steve worked at the binders with the patience of someone who'd survived 70 years in ice. Enhanced endurance meant he didn't tire. Enhanced metabolism meant he didn't need much sleep. The serum was designed to create the perfect soldier, and right now that meant being the perfect prisoner, compliant on the surface, relentlessly resistant underneath. The harmonic frequency was widening. Another few hours, maybe less, and he could disrupt the energy matrix enough to break free. Then he'd deal with containment fields, stormtroopers, and escaping a star destroyer in the middle of hyperspace. One problem at a time. The opportunity came during a shift change. Steve had been counting guard rotations, mapping patrol patterns, listening to the subtle differences in engine harmonics that suggested the Star Destroyer had dropped out of hyperspace. 72 hours in captivity, or maybe 96, his internal clock was unreliable without sunlight, and he'd finally identified the window. The binder's energy field fluctuated when the ship's power grid cycled for weapons charging. It was a microsecond weakness, barely noticeable, but the super soldier serum gave Steve reflexes fast enough to exploit it. He waited for the next cycle, felt the harmonic shift, and pulled. The binders shattered with a crack of discharged energy that left his wrists burned but functional. Steve moved immediately toward the containment field, analyzing its projection points. Energy barriers had generators, and generators had vulnerabilities. The panel beside the door was locked, but locks were just mechanical puzzles. Steve had learned to pick them during the war, breaking into Hydra facilities across occupied Europe. Alien technology operated on different principles, but the fundamentals remained: find the mechanism, understand its function, exploit its weakness. 30 seconds later, the containment field flickered and died. Steve stepped into the corridor. Empty for the moment, but that wouldn't last. He needed weapons, he needed his shield, and he needed to find the detention level's exit before alarms started screaming. The corridor branched in 3 directions. Steve chose left based on the subtle air current. Ventilation systems always pointed toward central areas. He moved quickly, staying low, using corners for cover. 2 stormtroopers appeared around the corner. Steve didn't give them time to raise their weapons. He closed the distance in 3 strides, disarmed the first with a strike to the wrist, and used the trooper's own rifle to incapacitate his partner. Both went down without firing a shot. Steve took their weapons, blaster rifle and a smaller pistol, and their comlink. He activated the device, listening to Imperial communications chatter. Shift rotation complete on detention level 4. Captain Rogers' cell shows containment failure. All units converge on detention level. Prisoner is considered extremely dangerous. So much for stealth. Steve ran. The corridor opened into a larger space, a security station with half a dozen troopers scrambling for weapons. He dove behind a console as blaster fire lit up the room, superheated bolts chewing into metal and plasteel. The blaster rifle in his hands felt wrong, lighter than he expected, the balance off, the trigger pull unfamiliar. But Steve had trained with dozens of weapon systems. Adaptation was survival. He blind fired around the console, forcing the stormtroopers into cover, then rolled to a new position. 3 quick shots, 3 troopers down. The remaining guards coordinated their fire, but Steve was already moving, using the security station's equipment as mobile cover. 2 minutes later, the security station was clear. Steve accessed the computer terminal, pulling up schematics of the Star Destroyer. The ship was enormous, over a mile long, housing thousands of personnel, bristling with weapons systems that could level cities. His cell had been on detention level 4. The hangar bay was 16 levels down. And his shield, according to the equipment manifest, was in a research lab on level 7, flagged for analysis by Imperial Science Division. Steve memorized the route and moved. The detention level descended into chaos behind him. Alarms wailed. Blast doors slammed shut, dividing the ship into quarantine sections. Steve heard orders being shouted, officers demanding updates, stormtroopers mobilizing for a manhunt through a ship with 10,000 rooms. He reached level 7 through a maintenance shaft, emerging in a corridor lined with laboratories. Scientists in gray uniforms scattered as he approached, more afraid of a loose prisoner than willing to interfere. The research lab was sealed behind a heavy door with biometric locks. Steve shot the control panel. The door sparked, groaned, and slid open halfway. Inside, his shield rested on an examination table, surrounded by scanning equipment and scientists who looked up in shock as Steve entered. One reached for an alarm. Steve put a stun bolt through the console before he could activate it. "Everyone out," Steve ordered, voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Now." The scientists fled. Steve grabbed his shield, feeling its familiar weight settle onto his arm like reuniting with an old friend. The vibranium surface showed no damage from Imperial analysis. They tried to cut it, scan it, stress test it. Every attempt had failed. A holographic display showed their findings: material composition unknown. Molecular structure defies conventional analysis. Recommend containment and further study. Steve shut down the display and moved back into the corridor. The hangar bay was 12 levels down through a ship that now knew exactly where he was and what he was doing. Every stormtrooper on the Star Destroyer would be converging on his position. Steve had faced worse odds. He made it 4 levels before running into the first organized resistance, a full platoon of stormtroopers with an AT-ST walker providing heavy support. The walker's massive guns tracked him, and Steve dove behind a bulkhead as blaster cannons tore chunks from the walls. Shield up, Steve waited for the firing pattern, then moved. He threw his shield at the walker's cockpit viewport. The vibranium disc hit with enough force to crack the transparisteel, then rebounded back to Steve's hand. The walker's pilot panicked, firing wildly. Steve used the confusion to close distance with the stormtrooper platoon. His shield deflected blaster fire as he moved through their ranks like a whirlwind, strikes that disarmed, blows that incapacitated, movements too fast for their training to counter. The platoon broke. Some retreated. Some called for backup. Steve didn't pursue. He needed the hangar bay, not a body count. 3 more levels. Steve descended through maintenance shafts and service corridors, avoiding main thoroughfares where resistance would be organized. He passed crew quarters where off-duty personnel sealed themselves inside, unwilling to confront an escaped prisoner who'd already cut through 2 platoons. Level 10. The hangar bay was close now. Steve could hear the distinctive whine of TIE fighter engines warming up, smell the ozone from repulsor lift systems. Agent Callus waited in the corridor ahead, flanked by a dozen stormtroopers in specialized armor, death troopers, their black uniforms marking them as elite. "Impressive escape, Captain Rogers," Callus said, holding his electrostaff in a ready position. "But you've reached the end of your run. The hangar is sealed. Every ship is locked down. And Lord Vader is returning from the bridge to deal with you personally." Steve assessed the situation. Death troopers were trained killers, better equipped and more skilled than standard stormtroopers. Callus moved like someone who knew how to use that electrostaff. And Vader was coming. "I've got a better idea," Steve said. "You let me take a ship, and nobody else gets hurt." "Unacceptable. You possess information too valuable to lose. Technology too advanced to abandon. And your capture would demonstrate to the rebellion that resistance is futile, even their newest symbol can be broken." "I'm not a symbol," Steve said quietly. "I'm just a soldier who's tired of watching people bow to tyrants." "Then die as a soldier," Callus replied, and attacked. The electrostaff crackled with energy as it swung toward Steve's head. Steve caught it on his shield, felt the electrical discharge ground harmlessly through vibranium, and countered with a strike that forced Callus back. The Death Troopers opened fire simultaneously, coordinated, professional, lethal. Steve moved through the blaster bolts like he was choreographing a dance. Shield deflecting, body twisting, feet carrying him forward into the formation. He took down 3 Death Troopers before they adjusted tactics, spreading out to prevent him from engaging them all simultaneously. Callus pressed the attack, electrostaff weaving patterns designed to find openings. He was good, trained in multiple combat styles, experienced from years of hunting rebels. But Steve had fought Hydra's best, gone toe-to-toe with enhanced opponents, survived battles that should have killed him. The electrostaff struck his shield again. Steve twisted, used the momentum to drive his shield's edge into Callus's ribs. The agent grunted, staggered, and Steve followed up with a punch that sent him crashing into the bulkhead. The remaining Death Troopers closed in, firing at point-blank range. Steve threw his shield. It ricocheted between them like a pinball, striking helmets, breaking weapons, creating chaos in their formation. When it returned to his hand, half the Death Troopers were down. The hangar bay door was right there. Sealed, but seals could be broken. Steve ran toward it, shield raised, and slammed into the door with the full force of enhanced strength behind him. The metal groaned. Didn't break, but groaned. He hit it again. The door buckled. Third strike, and the seal shattered. Steve burst into the hangar bay, a massive space filled with TIE fighters, Lambda-class shuttles, and cargo transports. Pilots scrambled for their ships. Ground crew dove for cover. Automated defenses tracked him, turbolasers powering up to fire. Steve spotted a small shuttle near the far exit, Imperial design, but all ships basically worked the same way. Engines, controls, life support. He could figure it out. He sprinted across the hangar deck as turbolasers opened fire. Energy bolts carved smoking craters in the floor, missing him by meters as he zigzagged toward the shuttle. A TIE fighter pilot tried to intercept him. Steve threw his shield, knocked the pilot unconscious, and kept running. The shuttle's boarding ramp was down. Steve raced up it, slammed the control to close the ramp, and dove into the cockpit. The controls were labeled in Orbesh, alien script he couldn't read. But buttons and switches followed logical patterns. Engine ignition was always prominent. Repulsor lifts always near the throttle. Weapon systems color-coded for safety. Steve started pressing buttons. The shuttle's engines roared to life. Repulsor lifts engaged, lifting the craft off the deck. Steve grabbed the control yoke, felt like a plane stick but with additional axes of movement, and pushed forward. The shuttle lurched toward the hangar bay's magnetic shield, the invisible barrier that kept atmosphere in while allowing ships to pass. Turbolasers tracked him, firing. Steve jinked left, right, the shuttle responding sluggishly to unfamiliar controls. Energy bolts superheated the air around him. And then he was through the shield, tumbling into the void of space. Stars stretched in every direction. The Star Destroyer loomed behind him, a wedge-shaped mountain of metal and firepower. TIE fighters were already launching in pursuit, their distinctive screaming engines cutting through the vacuum. Steve found what he hoped was the hyperdrive control and activated it. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. A damage indicator was flashing, something about hyperspace coordinates, or maybe navigation locks. Steve couldn't read the language, but he understood the problem. The shuttle needed a destination programmed before it would jump. The TIE fighters were closing fast, green blaster bolts stitching toward his shields. Steve did the only thing he could think of. He found the random jump protocol, the emergency system that would fling the ship to any random coordinates in the galaxy, and activated it. The galaxy stretched into lines of light. The shuttle jumped to hyperspace. And Steve Rogers, alone in a stolen Imperial shuttle hurtling through dimensions at faster-than-light speed, finally allowed himself to breathe. He'd escaped. He was alive. And somewhere in this vast galaxy, the rebellion was still fighting. Steve set course for nowhere, knowing that eventually he'd drop out of hyperspace and need a plan. But for now, for this moment, he'd won. Behind him, aboard the Devastator, Darth Vader stood in the damaged hangar bay, watching the hyperspace wake dissipate. "Shall we pursue, Lord Vader?" an officer asked nervously. "No," Vader said, his voice thoughtful. "Let him go. He will return to the rebellion. And when he does, we will be waiting." The officer hesitated. "My lord. Captain Rogers believes he has escaped. He believes himself free." Vader turned away from the viewport. "But freedom is an illusion. I have placed a tracking beacon in his shield's molecular structure. Wherever he goes, whatever he does, we will know. The rebellion's leadership will be revealed when Captain Rogers returns to them." Vader's mechanical breathing was the only sound in the suddenly silent hangar. "Patience, Commander. The Force has given us a gift. We need only wait for the rebellion to unwrap it." The shuttle dropped out of hyperspace near a moon that looked like it had been used for target practice. Craters pockmarked the surface, and the debris field surrounding it suggested recent combat. Steve checked the scanners. No Imperial signatures, no active conflicts, just the silent aftermath of a battle fought and finished. He'd been drifting for 6 hours, trying to figure out Imperial navigation systems through trial and error. The hyperdrive had failed twice, stranding him in empty space until he'd managed to restart it. His piloting skills were adequate for Earth-based aircraft, but this was something else entirely. Three-dimensional combat in frictionless environments where momentum worked differently and there was no up or down. The comm system crackled with static, then resolved into a familiar voice. "Unidentified shuttle, this is the Ghost. Transmit Imperial authorization codes or prepare to be fired upon." Relief flooded through Steve's chest. "Hera, it's Steve Rogers. I escaped the Star Destroyer. I need extraction." Silence for 3 seconds that felt like hours. "Steve." Hera's voice carried disbelief and hope in equal measure. "How did you, never mind. Transmit your coordinates. We're 2 hours out." "Coordinates transmitted." "Hera, I need to warn you," Vader interrogated me. "He knows about dimensional displacement, knows about the serum. The Empire's interested in what I represent. We'll discuss it when you're aboard." Hera out. Steve spent the next 2 hours examining the shuttle for tracking devices. He'd learned paranoia from Fury, never trust that an escape was clean, always assume the enemy was 3 steps ahead. The shuttle's exterior showed no obvious beacons, but that didn't mean they weren't there. He was disassembling a suspicious component near the communications array when the Ghost appeared on scanners, her distinctive silhouette recognizable even against the star field. The ships docked. Steve crossed through the airlock and found himself facing the entire crew, Hera, Kanan, Ezra, Sabine, Zeb, and even Chopper the astromech, who beeped something that sounded aggressively skeptical. "You look terrible," Sabine said, which Steve supposed was fair. He hadn't slept properly in days, his tactical suit was scorched and torn, and his wrist still bore burns from the binders. "I've had better weeks," Steve admitted. "How long was I gone?" "For days," Kanan said, studying Steve with that peculiar Force-sensitive intensity. "The Empire locked down Lothal completely. Martial law, curfews, interrogations. They were looking for you and for us. Did anyone? No civilian casualties directly attributed to your escape, Hera said, understanding the question. But the occupation got worse. The Empire's afraid, Steve. You proved that individuals can challenge their power, and they're overreacting. Steve felt the familiar weight of command decisions, the knowledge that his choices created ripples that affected people he'd never met. I'm sorry. Don't be. Zeb's voice was firm. You gave the people of Lothal something they haven't had in years, proof that the Empire bleeds. That's worth the increased patrols. They moved to the Ghost's common area, where Hera pulled up tactical displays showing Imperial fleet movements. Steve briefed them on everything, his interrogation with Callus, his encounter with Vader, the escape, his concerns about tracking devices. Vader placed something in your shield. Cannon's expression darkened. That's beyond even Inquisitor capabilities. Vader's connection to the Force is legendary, but manipulating matter at a molecular level? That requires precision I've never heard of outside of ancient Sith texts. Could he have actually done it? Hera asked. I don't know. Cannon turned to Steve. May I examine your shield with the Force? I might be able to sense any alterations. Steve hesitated, then handed over his shield. Cannon held it carefully, closing his eyes, his expression going distant. Minutes passed in silence while the rest of the crew waited. Finally, Cannon opened his eyes and set the shield down gently. There's something there. Microscopic. Embedded in the molecular lattice in a way that wouldn't show up on conventional scanners. It's elegant. Precise. And completely beyond my ability to remove without destroying the shield entirely. So they can track me, Steve said quietly. They can track the shield, Hera corrected. Which means we can use that. Steve saw where she was going immediately. Bait. Send the shield somewhere while I go somewhere else, split their attention. More than that. Hera's tactical mind was already racing ahead. We've been trying to identify Imperial command structures for years. If Vader is personally tracking you, that means wherever your shield goes, high-level Imperial resources will follow. We could use that to map their response patterns, identify their priorities, maybe even draw out targets we've never been able to locate. You're talking about making me a weapon against the Empire, Steve said. I'm talking about turning their own tactics against them, Hera replied. They wanted to track you, control you, use you. Instead, we use their tracking to our advantage. We become unpredictable. We strike where they don't expect. And every time they chase the shield signal, they're chasing a ghost. Ezra leaned forward, excited despite the danger. We could coordinate with other cells. Plant the shield in locations where the rebellion needs Imperial attention diverted. When Star Destroyers show up hunting for Captain Rogers, our people hit their actual target somewhere else. It's risky, Cannon said. If they figure out the pattern, if they realize the shield is separate from Steve. Then we adapt, Steve said, making the decision. I didn't come to this galaxy to hide. I came here by accident, but now that I'm here, I can help. If my shield can save lives by drawing Imperial forces away from civilians, that's a trade I'll make. Sabine studied him with new respect. You know this might mean you can't use your shield in combat. The moment it appears, the Empire knows where you are. I've fought without it before. Steve met each of their eyes in turn. What's the plan? Hera pulled up a star chart. There's a rebellion cell on Ryloth, my homeworld, that's planning a major operation against an Imperial supply depot. If we plant your shield there, make it look like you're leading the assault, Imperial reinforcements will flood the sector. Meanwhile, our actual target is the Imperial Navy's recruitment center on Lothal. We hit it while their forces are chasing shadows on Ryloth. Recruitment center? Steve asked. The Empire conscripts teenagers from occupied worlds, Cannon said, his voice bitter. Takes kids as young as 15, puts them through Imperial Academy training, turns them into stormtroopers or TIE pilots. Destroying the center on Lothal would free hundreds of conscripts and cripple their local recruitment for months. Steve thought about teenagers forced into military service, families torn apart by an empire that saw citizens as resources to exploit. He'd seen the same thing in Nazi-occupied territories, young men conscripted into armies that would send them to die for causes they didn't believe in. How long until the Ryloth operation? Steve asked. 72 hours, Hera said. Enough time to get your shield there, set up the scenario, and position ourselves for the real strike on Lothal. Then we've got a plan. Steve stood, feeling exhaustion pulling at him but pushing through it. The serum would sustain him, but even enhanced biology needed rest eventually. I'll need Imperial uniforms, identification, and a cover story for why I'm on Lothal without my shield. We can arrange that, Sabine said. I've forged Imperial credentials before. You'll be a transfer from another garrison, special operations, authorized to operate independently. And if we run into someone who can sense lies through the Force, then you'd better hope your inability to connect with the Force works in your favor, Cannon said. Force users read emotions, surface thoughts. If you're blank to their senses, they might just dismiss you as unimportant. It was a thin hope, but Steve had operated on thinner. One more thing, Steve said. When this is over, when we've hurt the Empire badly enough, I need to find a way home. I appreciate everything you're doing, and I'll fight alongside you as long as you need me. But Earth is still out there somewhere, and people I care about are still fighting their own battles. We'll help you however we can, Hera promised. The rebellion has contacts across the galaxy, scientists, archaeologists, Force mystics who study dimensional phenomena. If there's a way back to your world, we'll find it. Thank you. Steve felt the weight of that promise, knowing that these people were offering to help him even as they faced their own impossible odds. The Ghost jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward Ryloth and the next phase of a plan that would either cripple Imperial operations on Lothal or get them all killed. Steve found a quiet corner of the ship and finally allowed himself to rest. The super soldier serum would repair the damage from 4 days of captivity, heal the burns on his wrists, restore his body to fighting condition. But it couldn't heal the growing realization that this galaxy's war was becoming his war. That every choice he made drew him deeper into a conflict that spanned star systems and involved forces he barely understood. He'd been Captain America once, the symbol of his nation's ideals, fighting a clear war against obvious evil. Here, in this galaxy far from home, he was just Steve Rogers again. A soldier without a country, fighting for people he'd just met, in a war that might not end in his lifetime. But that was fine. He'd never needed a country to tell him what was worth fighting for. Freedom was worth fighting for. Justice was worth fighting for. The right of every person to live without fear, that was worth fighting for. The right of every person to live without fear, that was worth fighting for. Whether the enemy was Hydra or the Galactic Empire, the principle remained the same. Tyranny needed to fall. And Steve Rogers would be there to help push it. On Coruscant, in the Emperor's throne room, Darth Vader knelt before his master. The anomaly has escaped, Vader reported. As predicted. Emperor Palpatine smiled, his ancient features twisting with malevolent pleasure. And the tracking beacon? Active and transmitting. He has rejoined the rebellion cell on Lothal. They are planning something. Good. Let them plan. Let them believe they have gained an advantage. The Emperor's eyes gleamed with dark side energy. This Rogers, he represents something dangerous, my apprentice. Not to our military power, but to our philosophy. He is a symbol of resistance that cannot be corrupted, cannot be broken. Such symbols must be destroyed publicly, their defeat absolute and undeniable. What are your orders, my master? Let him fight. Let him inspire hope in the rebellion. Palpatine's smile widened. And when that hope burns brightest, when the rebellion commits resources to protect their new symbol, we will crush them all at once. The anomaly, the Lothal cell, and any fool who believes one man can stand against the Empire. As you wish, my master. Vader rose and departed, leaving the Emperor alone in his throne room. Palpatine gazed out at the galaxy spread before him, thousands of systems, billions of beings, all bowing to his will. One enhanced soldier from another dimension would not change that. Nothing would change that. The dark side had foreseen his victory. And the dark side was never wrong. The Imperial Recruitment Center on Lothal occupied what had once been a civilian education facility, a sprawling complex where children had learned history and science before the Empire converted it into a machine for manufacturing loyalty. Guard towers flanked the perimeter. Stormtroopers patrolled in shifts. Inside, hundreds of conscripts between 15 and 18 years old trained to become the Empire's next generation of enforcers. Steve watched from a rooftop 300 meters away, wearing an Imperial officer's uniform that Sabine had forged with disturbing accuracy. The credentials identified him as Lieutenant Commander Stevenson Rogers, transferred from Scarif Garrison for Special Operations Assessment. It would hold up to casual inspection, but prolonged scrutiny would reveal the forgery. They had maybe 2 hours before that happened. Shields in position on Ryloth, Hera's voice crackled through his earpiece. Cham Syndulla's people are making it visible, lots of activity around it, making sure Imperial scans pick up the signature. Star destroyers are already adjusting course. How many? Steve asked. 3 so far. Maybe more en route. Vader's ship is moving toward Ryloth. Hera paused. He's taking the bait, Steve. Steve felt the familiar pre-mission tension settle over him, not fear exactly, but heightened awareness of everything that could go wrong. Vader hunting his shield across the galaxy while Steve operated without his primary weapon. The super soldier serum made him formidable, but against blasters and stormtroopers in an urban environment, the shield's defensive capabilities would be sorely missed. You don't have to do this, Cannon said through the comm. He was positioned on another rooftop with Ezra, ready to provide force support if the operation went sideways. We can abort, find another target. Those kids in there didn't volunteer, Steve said quietly. They were taken from their families and told they were serving the Empire or their families would suffer. That's not service. That's slavery with better uniforms. Agreed, Sabine's voice cut in. She was inside the facility already, disguised as a supply technician, planting charges on key structural supports. Charges are set. When I blow them, you'll have maybe 90 seconds before every stormtrooper on Lothal converges on this location. 90 seconds to evacuate 400 conscripts, Zeb growled. He was coordinating with Numa's people, civilian transports hidden in nearby alleys ready to extract the teenagers once they were freed. This is insane. This is rebellion, Hera said. Chopper, are Imperial communications still jammed? The astromech beeped affirmatively from the Ghost, hovering in low orbit with jamming equipment running at full capacity. It would buy them minutes, maybe less. Steve checked his borrowed blaster one final time. He'd trained with the weapon during his days on the Ghost, learning its quirks and limitations. Not as reliable as Earth firearms, but effective at close range. All teams confirm ready status, Hera ordered. One by one, they checked in. Sabine inside the facility. Cannon and Ezra on overwatch. Zeb with the extraction teams. Numa coordinating civilian support. Everyone in position for an operation that would either save hundreds of lives or get them all killed. Captain Rogers, Hera said, her voice carrying the weight of command. This was your plan. Your call to make. Are we go? Steve thought about the teenagers inside that facility. Kids who'd been taken from homes on Lothal and dozens of other worlds, told they were serving something greater, trained to enforce tyranny against the very communities they'd been stolen from. He thought about Hydra's infiltration of S.H.I.E.L.D., how they'd corrupted good people by convincing them that security required sacrifice. How they'd turned friends into enemies and made heroes complicit in oppression. The Empire was doing the same thing, just on a galactic scale. "We're go," Steve said. "Execute." Sabine's charges detonated with precision timing, support columns in the facility's eastern wing collapsing in a controlled demolition that sent smoke and debris billowing into the pale Lothal sky. Alarms shrieked. Emergency protocols activated. Guards rushed toward the explosion, leaving the main courtyard temporarily undermanned. Steve moved. He dropped from the rooftop using a grappling line Sabine had provided, hit the ground running, and approached the main gate with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. An officer, responding to an emergency, authorized to be anywhere. "Lieutenant Commander," a stormtrooper sergeant acknowledged, snapping to attention. "What are your orders?" "Structural collapse in the eastern wing," Steve said, keeping his voice crisp and authoritative. "Evacuate all conscripts to the main courtyard immediately. I need a head count to ensure no one's trapped in the debris." "Sir, protocol requires." "Protocol requires we don't have dead conscripts in a training facility when the ISB conducts their investigation," Steve interrupted, using the Imperial Security Bureau's reputation for ruthlessness as leverage. "Move. Now." The sergeant hesitated for 1 second, then activated his comlink. "All units, begin conscript evacuation to main courtyard. This is not a drill." Inside the facility, Sabine's voice came through Steve's earpiece. "You're clear. They're opening the dormitories now. I'm heading to the administration building to wipe the conscript databases, don't want the Empire tracking these kids after we extract them." Steve moved into the courtyard as teenagers began filing out of buildings, confused and frightened. They wore gray uniforms that stripped away individuality, their heads recently shaved, expressions carrying the hollow look of people being systematically broken down and rebuilt as tools. Some were as young as 14. Children, playing at being soldiers because the alternative was watching their families suffer. Steve felt rage settle cold in his chest, the kind of anger that came from witnessing injustice and having the power to stop it. "Listen to me," he said, projecting his voice across the courtyard. Several hundred conscripts turned toward him, along with a dozen confused stormtroopers. "Your families were told that service to the Empire was mandatory. That refusing meant punishment. You were brought here against your will and told it was for the greater good." A stormtrooper lieutenant stepped forward. "Lieutenant Commander, what are you?" Steve drew his blaster and shot the control panel for the courtyard's main gate. It exploded in sparks, and the gate swung open. "Run," Steve said to the conscripts. "Civilian transports are 3 blocks north. They'll take you home. The Empire lied to you. You don't owe them anything." For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then a Twi'lek girl, maybe 16 years old, broke ranks and ran for the gate. 1 became 10. 10 became 50. Within seconds, the entire courtyard was flooding toward freedom, teenagers abandoning their uniforms and fleeing the facility that had imprisoned them. Stormtroopers raised their weapons, uncertain whether to fire on their own conscripts. Steve made the decision for them. He threw himself at the nearest trooper, disarming him with strikes that had 70 years of muscle memory behind them. 3 more troopers went down before they could coordinate a response. The courtyard descended into chaos, conscripts running, stormtroopers trying to establish order, and Steve Rogers fighting like the liberation of 400 teenagers depended on him. Because it did. Blaster fire erupted from the guard towers. Steve dove behind a transport vehicle, feeling superheated bolts impact the durasteel around him. Enhanced reflexes let him track the shooter's positions, calculate angles, identify the 2-second gaps between volleys. He emerged from cover, fired 3 precise shots, and took out the tower's targeting systems. The shooters had to aim manually now, giving the fleeing conscripts precious seconds to escape. Cannon's voice cut through the chaos. "Steve, you've got Imperial reinforcements incoming from the western garrison. 2 AT-STs and a full company of stormtroopers. 3 minutes out. Sabine, status? Steve called. Databases wiped, explosive charges set on the administration building. When it goes up, the Empire loses every record of conscript identities, family addresses, everything. They won't be able to track the kids. Her breathing was labored, she was running. I'm clear. Blow it. Steve triggered the detonator Sabine had given him. The administration building erupted in flames, documents and data servers consumed in an inferno that would erase the Empire's ability to pursue the freed conscripts. The explosion sent a plume of smoke into the sky visible from across Capital City. The remaining stormtroopers in the courtyard broke. Some tried to pursue the fleeing teenagers. Others called for backup. Steve incapacitated them systematically, using non-lethal force when possible but not hesitating when it wasn't. Extraction teams report successful pickup, Zeb's voice carried satisfaction. We've got about 300 conscripts loaded into transports. They're scattering to safe houses across the city. Empire won't find them all. What about the other 100? Steve asked, providing covering fire as the last conscripts fled through the gate. Already gone, Numa reported. Ran in different directions the moment you opened that gate. Smart kids. They'll find their way home. The distinctive mechanical footsteps of AT-ST walkers echoed through Capital City streets. Steve saw them approaching, 2 massive bipedal war machines, chin-mounted blasters already tracking toward the facility. Captain, you need to extract now, Hera said urgently. Those walkers will level the entire block. Steve ran through the facility's interior, using his memory of the layout to navigate toward the eastern wing where Sabine's initial charges had created an exit. Stormtroopers pursued, their blaster fire wild and uncoordinated. He emerged into an alley where Zeb waited with a speeder bike. Thought you could use a ride, Zeb said, gunning the engine. Steve jumped on behind him, and they accelerated through Lothal streets as the AT-ST walkers opened fire on the recruitment center. The facility that had imprisoned hundreds of children exploded behind them, towers collapsing, structures burning. The Empire would rebuild it. They always did. But for now, 400 teenagers were free. 400 lives saved from being turned into stormtroopers. It was enough. The Ghost made orbit an hour later, rendezvousing with the speeder at a prearranged extraction point. Steve climbed aboard, exhausted but uninjured, and found the crew celebrating. Did you see the Imperial communications? Ezra was practically bouncing with excitement. They're scrambling fleets toward Ryloth, convinced you're leading a major offensive. Vader's there personally, searching for the shield signature. How long until they realize it's a decoy? Steve asked. Maybe hours. Maybe days. Hera smiled. Either way, we've disrupted their operations badly. 300 conscripts freed, recruitment center destroyed, Imperial resources diverted across 2 sectors. This is the kind of victory the rebellion measures success by. Cannon approached, his expression serious despite the celebration. The Empire's going to retaliate. Lothal will suffer increased occupation, harsher patrols, collective punishment against civilians they suspect of helping us. Steve had expected this. Then we hit them again before they can establish control. Keep them off balance, force them to react instead of plan. Make them afraid that every recruitment center, every garrison, every symbol of Imperial control could be the next target. You're talking about sustained operations, Hera said. That requires resources we don't have, coordination we haven't achieved, and a symbol that can inspire cells across the galaxy to act simultaneously. You have the symbol, Sabine said, looking at Steve. Captain Rogers just proved that one person with conviction can challenge the Empire's authority. Word of this will spread. Other cells will hear about the recruitment center, about how conscripts were freed, about how an outsider chose to fight for people he'd never met. The Empire will spin it as terrorism, Cannon warned. Let them, Steve said. People know the difference between liberation and oppression. Those conscripts, their families, everyone who watched the Empire lose control of that facility, they'll remember. And memory is how resistance starts. The Ghost jumped to hyperspace, carrying them away from Lothal toward deep space where the Empire's long reach couldn't immediately follow. In the ship's cargo bay, stored safely but inactive, Steve's shield rested on Ryloth, still transmitting its tracking beacon, still drawing Imperial forces toward a fight that didn't exist. On Ryloth, Vader stood amid the ruins of an empty rebellion staging area, his hands clenched into fists. The shield was here. The tracking beacon confirmed it. But Captain Rogers was not. A decoy, Vader said, his voice carrying across the comm to the Emperor. They used the shield to draw us away from their actual target. Clever, Palpatine acknowledged from Coruscant. But irrelevant. One recruitment center, one cell of freed conscripts, these are acceptable losses. The anomaly remains tracked. We know where his weapon is. Eventually, he will need it, and when he retrieves it, we will be waiting. And if he doesn't retrieve it? If he operates without the shield permanently? The Emperor was silent for a moment. Then he becomes less useful to us. But also less dangerous. A symbol without his icon is just a man, Lord Vader. And men die easily in this galaxy. Vader closed the communication and stared at the shield lying abandoned in the dust. Captain Rogers had sacrificed his primary weapon to save children he didn't know. Had prioritized others' freedom over his own tactical advantage. It reminded Vader of someone. Someone he'd been, perhaps, in another life. The memory was painful. He crushed it beneath dark side discipline. Captain Rogers was an anomaly. A threat. And threats were to be eliminated. Personal feelings were irrelevant. The dark side had taught him that. Aboard the Ghost, as his crew celebrated their victory, Steve Rogers sat alone in the cargo bay, thinking about the shield he'd left behind. It had been with him since the beginning, through World War II, through the ice, through every battle he'd fought as Captain America. Leaving it behind felt like leaving part of himself. But he'd made the right call. Those 400 conscripts were worth more than any weapon, any symbol, any piece of equipment. They were people. Living, breathing human beings with futures that deserved better than serving an empire built on fear. He'd saved them. That was enough. Hey, Hera said, appearing in the doorway. You did good today, Steve. Better than good. You reminded us why we fight. I just did what needed doing. That's exactly what I mean. Hera sat beside him. Most people see the Empire's size and give up. They convince themselves that resistance is futile, that one person can't make a difference. You proved them wrong today. Steve smiled slightly. I had help. You had a team. There's a difference. Hera was quiet for a moment. We're going to get your shield back eventually. When the time is right, when we can turn their own surveillance against them one more time. But until then, I fight without it. Steve looked at his hands, remembering the feel of vibranium on his arm. I've done it before. I can do it again. Good. Hera stood. Because the rebellion just got a lot more interesting with you in it. And something tells me Vader's not done hunting you. She left Steve alone with his thoughts and the stars streaming past the viewport. Somewhere in this galaxy, his shield lay waiting. Somewhere in this galaxy, Darth Vader planned his next move. And somewhere in this galaxy, 400 teenagers who'd been stolen from their families were going home. Steve Rogers had landed in a galaxy far, far away by accident. But he was choosing to stay and fight by conviction. And that made all the difference. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport of the Ghost as the ship drifted through deep space, hidden among the gravitational shadows of a forgotten nebula. 3 weeks had passed since the Lothal operation. 3 weeks of scattered reports filtering through rebellion channels, freed conscripts reuniting with families, Imperial recruitment drives failing across a dozen systems, whispers spreading through occupied worlds that resistance was possible. Steve Rogers stood at that viewport now, watching light bend around distant suns, thinking about home. Earth felt impossibly distant. Not just in space, but in concept, a world where his greatest enemies had been defeated, where the Avengers protected cities instead of star systems, where tyranny operated on a scale he could comprehend. Here, the Empire controlled thousands of worlds. Here, freedom was measured in small victories against overwhelming odds. Here, going home meant finding a way to cross dimensional barriers that shouldn't exist. But he wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. The door opened behind him. Hera entered, carrying 2 containers of what passed for coffee in this galaxy, bitter, chalky, nothing like Earth's version, but warm and caffeinated enough to matter. "Thought you could use this," she said, offering him one. Steve accepted it gratefully. "Can't sleep. Never could before missions." Hera joined him at the viewport. "We've been contacted by High Command. They want to meet you. Officially bring you into the rebellion's leadership structure, give you operational authority across multiple cells. Because of Lothal. Because of everything. The escape from Vader. The recruitment center. The proof that the Empire's symbols can be challenged." Hera sipped her coffee. "You've become what we desperately needed, Steve, evidence that courage still matters in a galaxy that's been taught to fear." Steve was quiet for a moment, processing the weight of what she was offering. Leadership. Authority. The chance to coordinate resistance on a scale that could actually threaten Imperial control. It was also a target on his back. A guarantee that Vader and the Empire's full attention would remain focused on him permanently. "I'll meet them," Steve said finally. "But I need to be clear about something, I'm not abandoning the search for a way home. I'll fight alongside the rebellion as long as you need me, but Earth is still out there. The people I left behind are still fighting their own battles. We'll help you find your way back," Hera promised. "The rebellion has resources you haven't seen yet. Scientists who study hyperspace anomalies. Force mystics who understand dimensional travel. Ancient Jedi texts that reference tears in reality. If there's a path home, we'll find it together." Together, Steve repeated, feeling the word settle into something like belonging. He'd lost his team when he crossed dimensions, lost the Avengers, lost Fury, lost everyone who'd fought beside him against threats Earth couldn't face alone. But he'd found something here too. A different team. A different war. The same principles worth defending. Behind them, the crew of the Ghost had gathered without announcement. Kanan with his lightsaber clipped to his belt, forever watchful. Ezra still carrying the eager energy of youth tempered by too much experience. Sabine with her painted armor and artist's soul wrapped in a warrior's discipline. Zeb, massive and loyal, the kind of soldier Steve had served with across a dozen battlefields. Chopper, beeping with mechanical irritation but proving himself invaluable with every operation. "So?" Ezra asked. "Are we officially a strike team now, or what?" "We're whatever the rebellion needs us to be," Steve said, turning to face them. "But yeah. If you'll have me, I'm in. For as long as it takes." Sabine grinned behind her helmet. "Does this mean we get to paint a star on the Ghost? Make it official?" "Absolutely not," Hera said, but she was smiling. "We're going to need to retrieve your shield eventually," Kanan said, more seriously. "The tracking beacon makes it a liability, but it's also leverage. The Empire thinks they know where you are when that shield moves. We can use that." "We will," Steve agreed. "When the time is right. When we can turn their surveillance into our advantage one more time." He looked at each of them in turn. "I came to this galaxy by accident. But staying here, fighting beside you, that's a choice I'm making freely. The Empire took everything from people across thousands of worlds. They need to learn that some things can't be taken. Some spirits can't be broken. Some fights are worth starting even if you don't live to see them finished. Sounds like something a Jedi would say, Canon observed. Sounds like something a soldier says, Zeb countered. A good soldier. Steve raised his container of terrible coffee in a toast. To the rebellion. To freedom. And to proving that tyranny always falls eventually. They raised their drinks in response, a moment of unity before the next operation, the next battle, the next impossible mission against overwhelming odds. Somewhere in the galaxy, Darth Vader hunted for the man who'd escaped his grasp. Somewhere in the galaxy, the Emperor planned strategies to crush symbols before they could inspire hope. Somewhere in the galaxy, 400 freed conscripts told stories about the stranger in strange armor who'd chosen their freedom over his own weapon. And somewhere in the vast darkness between dimensions, a path home waited to be discovered. But for now, Captain Steve Rogers had a war to fight. Not the war he'd trained for. Not the war he'd expected. But a war that needed him nonetheless. The Ghost's engines hummed to life, carrying them toward their rendezvous with Rebellion High Command, toward new operations and greater dangers, toward a future where one man from another dimension would help shape the destiny of a galaxy far, far away. Steve Rogers had been many things, a kid from Brooklyn, a super soldier, an avenger, a man out of time. Now he was something else entirely. A symbol that courage transcended universes. A reminder that freedom was worth any sacrifice. A sentinel of the stars. And in a galaxy that had forgotten what hope looked like, that was exactly what the rebellion needed. May the Force be with you. More stories await.